Chapter 5. The Question of Return. When the young Venkataraman left home, it came as a complete surprise to his family. Despite his changed manner and the family destiny, no one had anticipated it. Searches and inquiries were made without avail. His mother, who was staying at the time with relatives in Madurai, was more distressed than any of them. She implored her brother-in-laws, Subayer and Nelapayer, to go out and search until they found him. A rumor was heard that he had joined a theatrical troupe playing traditional religious dramas in Trivandrum. Nelapayer promptly went there and made inquiries among the various dramatic companies, but of course without result. Still, Alagamal refused to accept the failure and insisted on his going a second time and taking her with him. At Trivandrum, she did in fact see a youth of Venkataraman's age and height and with similar hair, who turned his back on her and went away. Feeling convinced that it was her Venkataraman and that he was avoiding her, she returned home dejected. Subayer, the uncle with whom Venkataraman had stayed in Madurai, died in August of 1898. Nelapayer and his family went to attend the funeral, and it was there that they had their first news of the missing Venkataraman. A young man who was attending the ceremony told them that during a recent visit to the Muth, the private temple in Madurai, he heard one Annamalai Tambaran speaking with great reverence of a young Swami at Tiruvannamalai. Hearing that the Swami came from Tiruchuzi, he had asked for more details and learnt that his name was Venkataraman. "It must be your Venkataraman, and he is now a revered Swami," he concluded to the mother. Nelapayer was a second-grade pleader, practicing at Madurai. On hearing this news, he at once set out for Tiruvannamalai with a friend to verify it. They found their way to the Swami, but he was already staying in the mango orchard, and its owner, Venkatarama Naikar, refused them entrance, saying, "He is Muni, has taken a vow of silence. Why go in and disturb him?" Even when they pleaded that they were relatives, the most he would allow was to send in a note to him. Nelapayer wrote on a piece of paper that he had with him, saying, "Pleader of Madurai, Nelapayer wishes to see you." The Swami showed already that keen perception of mundane affairs coupled with complete detachment from them, which was to characterize him later, and which surprised so many devotees. He observed that the paper on which the note was written came from the registration department and had some office matter on the back of it in the handwriting of his elder brother, Nagaswami, from which he deduced that Nagaswami had become a clerk in the registration department. Just the same, in later years, he would turn a letter over and examine its address and postmark before opening it. He gave permission for the visitors to enter, but when they did so, sat aloof and silent, without a trace of the interest he had just shown in examining the note. Any sign of interest would only have encouraged the vain hope of his return. Nelapayer was deeply moved to see him in this deep state. A Swami, but unkempt, unwashed, with matted hair and long nails. Supposing him to be a Muni, he addressed himself instead to Palani Swami and Naikar, explaining that it gave him great pleasure to find that one of his family had attained such a high state, but that the creature comforts should not be ignored. The Swami's relatives wished to have him near them. They would put no pressure on him to abandon his vows or mode of life. Let him continue as a silent Swami and an ascetic, but at Madurai, where Nelapayer lived, there was the shrine of the great saint. He could stay there, and his wants would be attended to without disturbing him. The pleader pleaded with all his eloquence, but in this case without avail. The Swami sat motionless, with no sign even of having heard. Nelapierre had no option but to accept his failure. He wrote to Alagamal the good news that her son had been found, coupled with the distressing news that he was quite changed, it would not go back to them. After 5 days at Tiruvannamalai, he returned to Manamadurai. Shortly after this, the Swami left the mango orchard and went to a small temple of Arunachala to the west of the Ayakakulam tank. Always reluctant to depend on others for service, he decided now to go out daily and beg his food instead of letting Palani Swami provide for him. "You go one way to beg your food, and I will go another," he bade him. "Let us not live together." To Palani Swami it was a terrible blow. Devotion to the Swami was his mode of worship. He went out alone as bidden, but nightfall found him back at the Arunagirinathar temple. How could he live without his Swami? He was allowed to stay. The Swami was still maintaining silence. He would stop at the threshold of a house, clap his hands, and if any food was given him, would receive it in his cupped hands and eat it standing in the road. Even though invited, he would never enter a house. He went on a different street each day and never begged twice from the same house. He said later that he had begged in nearly all the streets of Tiruvannamalai. After a month at the Arunagirinathar temple, he took up his abode in one of the towers of the great temple and the Alari garden in the temple. He was already followed by devotees wherever he went. He stayed here only a week and then went to Pavazukunru, one of the eastern spurs of Arunachala, and stayed in the temple there. He would sit here as before, immersed in deep samadhi, the bliss of being, and only leave the place to beg food while Palani Swami was away. It often happened that the temple priest would lock him in and go away after performing puja, not troubling to look and see whether he was inside. It was here that Alagamal found her son. After receiving the news from Nelapierre, she waited until the Christmas holidays when her eldest son, Nagaswami, was free to accompany her, and they went to Tiruvannamalai. She recognized her Venkataraman immediately, despite his wasted body and matted hair. With all a mother's love, she lamented his condition and besought him to go back with her, but he sat unmoved, not answering, not even showing that he heard. Day after day she returned, bringing him tasty things to eat, entreating and reproaching, but without effect. One day, stung by his apparent lack of feeling for her, she burst into tears. He still did not answer, but lest his compassion should show and give her false hopes of what could not happen, he rose and walked away. Another day she enlisted the sympathy of the devotees who had gathered round, pouring out her grief to them and beseeching them to intervene. One of them, Panchayapa Pillai, said to the Swami, "Your mother is weeping and praying. Why do you not at least give her an answer? Whether it is yes or no, you can reply to her. Swami need not break his vow of silence. Here are pencil and paper. Swami can at least write what he has to say." Venkataraman took the pencil and paper and in utterly impersonal language wrote, "The ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their prarabdha karma, the destiny to be worked out in this life. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen, try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen, do what you may to prevent it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain in silence. In essence, this is the same as Christ saying to his mother, "Woman, what have I to do with you? Don't you know that I have to be about my Father's business?" In form, it is very typical of Sri Bhagavan, first that he should stay silent when the answer could only be negative, and then that when the silence was not accepted, and under further pressure, he did give an answer, and it was couched in such general terms as to be an impersonal doctrinal utterance, and yet, at the same time, an answer to the specific question according to the needs of the questioner. Sri Bhagavan was uncompromising in his teaching that whatever is to happen will happen, while at the same time he taught that whatever happens is due to prarabdha, a man's balance sheet of destiny, acting according to so rigorous a law of cause and effect that even the word justice seems too sentimental to express it. He refused ever to be entangled in a discussion on free will and predestination, for such theories, although contradictory on the mental plane, may both reflect aspects of truth. He would say, "Find out who it is who is predestined or has free will. All the actions that the body is to perform are already decided upon at the time it comes into existence. The only freedom you have is whether or not to identify yourself with the body." If one acts a part in a play, the whole part is written out beforehand, and one acts as faithfully whether one is Caesar who is stabbed or Brutus who stabs, being unaffected by it because one knows that one is not that person. In the same way, he who realizes his identity with the deathless self acts his part on the human stage without fear or anxiety, hope or regret, not being touched by the part played. If one were to ask what reality one has when one's actions are determined, it would lead only to the question, who then am I? If the ego that thinks it makes decisions is not real, and yet I know that I exist, what is the reality of me? This is only a preparatory mental version of the quest that Sri Bhagavan described, but it is an excellent preparation for the real quest. And yet, the apparently conflicting view that a man makes his own destiny is no less true, since everything happens by the law of cause and effect, and every thought, word, and action brings about its repercussion. Sri Bhagavan was as definite about this as other masters. He said to a devotee, Shiva Praksam Pillai, in a reply quoted later in Chapter 10, "As beings reap the fruit of their actions in accordance with God's laws, the responsibility is theirs, not his." He constantly stressed the need for effort. It is recorded in the Maharshi's Gospel that a devotee complained, "After leaving this ashram in October, I was aware of the peace that prevails in Sri Bhagavan's presence, enfolding me for about 10 days. All the time, while busy in my work, there was an undercurrent of that peace in unity. It was almost like the dual consciousness which one experiences while half asleep at a dull lecture. Then it faded, and it went entirely, and the old stupidities came in instead." And Sri Bhagavan replied, "If you strengthen the mind, that peace will become constant. its duration is proportionate to the strength of mind acquired by repeated practice. In the small book Spiritual Instruction, a devotee referred explicitly to the apparent contradiction between destiny and effort. If, as is said, everything happens according to destiny, even the obstacles that retard and prevent one from successfully carrying out the meditation may have to be considered insuperable, as being set up by some irrevocable destiny. How, then, can one ever hope to surmount them? And to this, Sri Bhagavan replied, that which is called destiny, preventing meditation, exists only to the externalized and not to the introverted mind. Therefore, he who seeks inwardly in quest of the self, remaining as he is, does not get frightened by any impediment that may seem to stand in the way of carrying on his practice of meditation. The very thought of such obstacles is the greatest impediment.